Welcome to Penthouse or Outhouse, the show where two product managers dissect startups that either went to the moon or went down in flames. Today's episode is about an Australian startup called Milkrun, but really it's about more than that. It's about an entire category of startup that was all the rage during the COVID years, Q-commerce, which is really just a fancy way of saying,
"Give it to me now."
if you lived in an Australian capital city during COVID, you probably saw people in blue shirts zipping around on e-bikes, delivering groceries. You maybe even summoned a tiny jar of smoked paprika because at 7:15 p.m. on a Wednesday, you decided that tonight was the night that you were finally cooking that taco recipe that you'd bookmarked on the New York Times app 3 months earlier. But halfway through searing the mince and while draining the black beans, you discovered that your spice rack contained 4 different types of salt, cumin from 2018, and absolutely no paprika. And no, you would not be changing out of your Dorito-stained sweatpants, putting on a mask and going out in public, but you'd also be damned if this meal was going to turn out bland. But what you probably didn't do, and what I also did, was wonder, how on earth does this thing make money? And that's what this episode is about. Will, how you doing? Welcome to a long-awaited episode of Penthouse or Outhouse after a bit of a hiatus.
Yeah, well, look, I think it was a pretty worthwhile hiatus. Congratulations on your many achievements in the interim. It was a wonderful wedding.
Thank you. It did coincide with the trip back to Australia, and as a consequence of that, I started thinking about Australian startups. And so we're going to focus on one of those specifically, but also an industry more generally, because the fate of this Australian startup was, I guess, a little bit of a canary in the coal mine for the rest of the industry, even though it came to the scene relatively late. And that one is Milkrun, which I've told you about in advance this time because insofar as we're looking at a whole industry, I thought it would be good to get your 2 cents worth in a more detailed way.
Totally. Yeah, I really lived the Milkrun dream when it was a thing. But it's nice to bring the story home and learn something from a local experience rather than going overseas all the time.
Yeah, well, speaking of living the Milkrun dream, it's in recent enough history that tell me about when you heard about it, when you first started using it, what your experience of it was.
Totally. So Milkrun, the instant delivery service, was one of those COVID fever dreams. I think it launched in 2021. And I think my first experience with it was actually it opened one of its small little distribution centers directly across the road from my house in an old cafe. And so you can imagine this it was a small shop space filled to the brims with convenience foods and snacks and drinks and everything else. And then all the Milkrun riders chicly outfitted in some actually pretty cool Milkrun merch and on custom Milkrun e-bikes cruising up and down the streets, delivering things to the residents of Surrey Hills.
COVID fever dream is actually an apt description of my first experience of it, insofar as I was first told about it by a mutual friend of ours when I was on the couch with COVID and really struggling. And she was like, have you heard about this service? It's great. You should get it. And also, given I was running not particularly profitable startup at the time, I remember my first impression of it was, how is this making money? This can't be making money.
Absolutely. It all felt too tidy and too elegantly executed to be something that could be profitable that quickly out the gate.
No scrappiness on the vibes of it. It all looked very, as you said, very shiny and very nice. So it obviously raised an enormous amount of money. But that was off the back of a bit of a wave for a bigger industry of quick delivery that was branded Q-commerce. And this was specifically around delivery of groceries, not just delivery of everything, but that's what we're going to sort of focus on here. And there are a few different firms there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of these. There was Go Puff in the US, and
I always thought that was a weed brand or something, but
yeah, well, it was founded in 2013, but it did have a bit of a Q-commerce pivot in 2018. So the name kind of gives it away.
But getting into data centers, it's the same.
Yeah, exactly. There was Getter is the biggest one, and that was in Turkey. It came out of. That was founded in 2015, and it really had a bit of a Q-commerce breakthrough in 2020 when you had that COVID era surge in demand, and it expanded extremely aggressively in 2021, 22, and over that sort of 7-year period, it raised over $5 billion US dollars.
Wait,
Gorillas,
5 billion.
5 billion with a B. Yeah. Gorillas was on a tear as well in Germany. So that was founded in 2020. It actually got acquired by Getter in 2022. But against that backdrop, I guess that would have been the basis of the story that the Milkrun founders were pitching in 2021 when they raised $75 million initially to launch in Surrey Hills and have that slick merch.
Well, and then a bunch of them launched in Australia around the same time. I remember there was Volley, which that also had a shop, like a storefront, whatever, just down the hill from here. And I think its sign is actually still up there. No one's ever taken over that space after it. So there's still remnants of, there's the long tail of that VC investments really hung around.
There was also Send, I think, which was not long for this world, but the vibe was almost like, did you ever watch Ronnie Cheng's stand-up special in 2019 when he was talking about Amazon Prime and how it's too slow? And he's like, I want it now. Give me the pen now. Anyway, it's pretty good.
Consumer demand there, clearly.
Yeah, it's like they'd watch Ronnie Cheng stand up, Nathan Fielder's 8-minute pizza delivery, and gone, you know what? I think there's an actual business in here. Let's go for it.
Good on them. It's worth a shot. Worth a shot.
Well, why don't we get into the Milkrun story more specifically? You were obviously a prime prospect for this company, living in about as inner city as you can get in Sydney, and that's where it launched in Australia alongside some, I guess, equivalent Melbourne suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about its trajectory and how you saw it expand from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think I had maybe I had an unreasonable view of it, and it looked busy. There was always people going in and out of the store. It seemed to have like reasonably quick stock turnover. But the most unusual part of the positioning is that it was directly across the road from a full supermarket. So Woolworths is the Australian supermarket chain, or one of the two big supermarket chains, directly across the road from a full Woolworths, which also kind of significantly served the local area. And so it was always funny to think about, well, like who's actually getting delivery? Because for most people, it's going to be quicker to walk to the supermarket and go and pick up the things that they need. But nonetheless, it seemed to be really busy. I used it a couple of times, more because they had some like more premium items in there. So there's a pasta brand called Fabrica, which does this like great single serve pasta, and Woolworths didn't have that, but Milkrun did. And so I'd always felt a little bit self-indulgent getting the Milkrun rider to cycle 30 meters and then get out and like drop it at my place. I was like, this seems ridiculous. Why did I pay a delivery charge for that? But I think it was interesting to see how different friend groups of mine interacted with Milkrun. Obviously, that was my experience. Some older friends were like, this is ridiculous, don't be silly. But some younger friends who had just moved to the suburb and hadn't developed a shopping routine yet actually used Milkrun as their kind of daily driver for groceries, which was crazy to imagine. But yeah, they would be ordering it 4 or 5 times a week to get their meat and their vegetables and everything else that they would cook at home. It wasn't just a convenience proposition.
It wasn't just a convenience proposition, but it's fair to say that it came heavily subsidized, right? So they had a 10-minute delivery rule when they first started out, which, to your point about who's using it when you can just walk across the street, it'd probably be quicker. I guess the founders recognized that was their primary competition, and so they had to offer something that was compelling against that. But that came with a cost. Initially, the cost was $40 per delivery lost by the company when they started off, which is pretty brutal unit economics, but it kind of makes sense, right? Like, you've got to actually manage all of the stock. It's not necessarily quite like a food delivery where you outsource that to a restaurant that deals with all of that crap and you just do the delivery. Like, you've got to get all of the goods there in addition. And yeah, that's as a result of that, you did start to see that 75 million initial investment disappear quite quickly.
Yeah, and then the other side of it was, so in Australia, the labour market is interesting for these kind of services. So for most people who work for Uber or other kind of on-demand services, they're contractors. But Milkrun actually employed its riders because it was the only way, like, to keep enough liquidity in the system to deliver on that 10-minute delivery promise and they didn't want to outsource the delivery to some other firm who had the kind of capacity to absorb that into their system. So I think, they're paying a fixed wage to these people who are cycling up and down the suburb all day, which is great for those people. What a nice job being paid to cycle around and drop off bougie treats. But yeah, like again, super challenging from a unit economics when you don't have a high enough utilization. Just drains your cash.
And part of that's on the demand side as well, right? So it's not just the labor rights, it's the fact that you don't have that spiky delivery window the way you do with lunch and dinner, right? So you can kind of know that everyone's going to want to order something around lunchtime when it's Uber Eats. Everyone's going to want to order something around dinner when it's Uber Eats, and plan your resourcing accordingly. You can't really do that if you're going to fulfill your 10-minute delivery promise for groceries, which people could want at any given time.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I do remember the founders talking about, they had some ability to predict, because a lot of it might be people who had like not organized anything for dinner, or they'd forgotten spices, or they needed something for dessert. And so there was some peakiness, but I think you can't just like let the bottom drop out in case there is demand that you hadn't predicted.
Yeah, and I mean they grew like Topsy for the first year or two, but how much of that do you think was false signal from the fact of everyone, particularly in Australia, being locked inside their house?
Yeah, I think, I mean, part of the growth was also just expanding. Like, they added new locations and unlocked new suburbs. And like of course, you get growth when you unlock new markets that have some demand in them, particularly when that demand is amplified by people staying at home or testing out the novelty of it as well. There was a lot of kind of chatter and press coverage of Milkrun and Volley and all the equivalents. And so I think there was a combination of unlocking new markets, novelty, and this like time-bound experience of people being locked at home. But yeah, I think it would be fair to say there was some false signal there of the growth rate that could be expected for Milkrun.
I think even beyond that, the size of the cart must have been an issue, right? Like, whereas normally for groceries, people are going in and they're spending maybe $150 on a weekly shop for just one person. I think the average order size started off at 30 and maybe peaked at like $50. And when you're adding in the labor costs associated with actually delivering on that promise, then
Yeah.
that becomes pretty difficult. And
Yeah.
also, you've got the huge fixed cost of the dark stores that are everywhere, but they're not actually monetized in the same way a Woolworths is, which already
Yeah.
has an
Yeah.
existing customer base that's viable when it's already there. So I think that it was definitely a little bit ambitious from that perspective as well, and it made it pretty questionable when reportedly, I mean, this is a secondary source, but apparently in the sort of their pitching, they were talking about $7 billion in total revenue by 2026, where in 2026 now, it's fair to say that that hasn't materialized. But do you think that that was pretty obviously foreseeable, or do you think that that was kind of reasonable based upon whatever assumptions they were going off at the time?
$7 billion of revenue. Like, well, how much revenue does Woolworths do at the moment? Like, probably, I'm not sure.
I don't know whether there was international expansion planned amongst that
Yeah,
as well.
okay, right. I mean, regardless of anything else, you can imagine that it would be easy for Australians to spend $7 billion on groceries, right? Like, I don't know. I can't imagine that the plan for 2026 looked just delivering everything to everyone in 10 minutes. Presumably, that strategy involved things that would deliver larger basket sizes, better scheduling, like better utilization of riders and resources and everything else. But 10-minute delivery in reasonably contested markets doesn't feel like a great place to get a foothold to try and
No,
build out on that vision necessarily.
no, I don't think so. I wonder to what extent it was a bit of a strategy of just, if we can survive the longest, then we can actually just change our business model once we've had sufficient customer acquisition, or potentially go for like go for an acquisition, like a real acquisition from a Coles or a Woolworths or someone, once they capture
Yeah.
that market. So
Yeah.
if maybe they were thinking if we can just outlast Volley and Send, then after that we can ditch our 10-minute delivery rule. We can start increasing the prices significantly on the groceries that we're using there and sort of boil the frog, as it were, to try and make people just accept it. Kind of the way that people have with Uber Eats. Like if you look at the actual menu price at Uber Eats, one of the sneaky ways that they get you is that they make the menu price significantly more expensive, and then they also have the delivery fee. So it's not just you're paying the sticker price plus the delivery fee, you're paying an inflated sticker price plus the delivery fee, and then that's how it kind of stays viable, as well as not having those cost constraints.
And not to foreshadow, but that continues to be the case when you use these services, even though some of them are no longer independent.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, the constraints that we've run into, obviously, and I don't think we're giving away too much, but by the tone of our conversation, to say that the business didn't work, neither on an individual level or more generally beyond that. But density is obviously a huge problem, which I refer to it being the canary in the coal mine. The Australian versions of this collapsed much faster than the international versions of this. And I think it's because we don't have the same scale of the market. Like maybe it can work a little bit in Surrey Hills and Paddington in Sydney, and then maybe in Richmond in Melbourne. But if you try and get beyond that, then your costs significantly go up to fulfill each order. You're probably still not going to see any increase to the basket size. You're going to have more rider idle time on that fixed cost model where they're employees, not contractors. So it's kind of structurally loss making. And in the end, even though Volley and Send did go out of business like a year before them, or maybe a little less than that, Milkrun managed to go through $85 billion of funding. So they did get additional funding, but obviously not enough. And then eventually shuttered things, I think, in mid-2023. So that was just a sign of things to come, because they were like, I've only got the numbers for Send, but I imagine it's kind of representative. Send was trying to get a 15 million additional raise at a 50 million valuation, and investors went, no, thank you, having seen where things were going.
It's good money after bad at that point.
Exactly. And in addition to that, we talk about interest rates a bit. Obviously, there are a number of interest rate hikes over that period, which I think, what was it, like 11 in a row?
Yeah, we went from what, like 1.5% to 4.5% or something?
Something like that.
Horrific.
That it did mean that they were able to save face a little bit, I guess, by blaming economic conditions for their failure, which to an extent is true, but I would say that probably just accelerated their failure given the lack of profitability from a fundamental business standpoint.
100%. It does seem it's like fundamentally mismatched to the value that people would put on a 10-minute delivery versus the cost that it actually provides across the entire value chain to do that. Like, it's just not worth enough to consumers in most cases to do that, unless you're like the most catastrophically hungover person in the world.
Yeah, big market in Australia, but evidently
Milkrun is only open on Sunday mornings.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though, because it's like, what is the tipping point at which people won't use it enough? I mean, if you speak to my wife about it, she's like, "Oh, that was the greatest thing ever." I'm like, "Well, sure. You're a UX designer though. Like, it is a great user experience."
It's beautiful. It was so nice. It was so fun and friendly.
Yeah, to have somebody subsidize grocery shopping for you, but like, it's also a great user experience to have a store where people walk in and you give them $40, but it doesn't really make it a very good business.
One problem with that.
Yeah. Anyway, as foreshadowed, this did precede more of a global collapse. So around, I want to say like late 2022, Gorillas did sell under not very favorable circumstances to Getter. So that's the German one was sold to the Turkish one that had more scale.
Yeah.
Because, as you know, in the startup sector in 2022 and 2023, people were like, actually, wouldn't it be cool if businesses made money?
Profitability, who knew? What a remarkable option.
Basically, capital dried up, and so did these businesses. So I think Getter rather, the Turkish one, only made it to like 2024. So it lasted for a total of 9 years. But even that one, the one that had a lot of scale, expanded aggressively internationally, even to the UK, retreated more and more, but then went the way of Milkrun and had hundreds I guess in their case, thousands of layoffs and eventually shut up shop.
Yeah, right. Gosh. Okay, so there's not really anything in exactly the same model anymore.
No, I think that one's been done. And I think it's a good time just to make it sort of clearer to compare and contrast versus the Uber Eats and DoorDash.
Yeah.
Because I think on face value, people would think, and I imagine this was part of the investment story as well, is like, oh, I mean, they can do it for there. Why not for this? Well, maybe you can explain to the listeners or at least recapitulate why not delivery groceries versus delivery meals.
Yeah. I mean, it's delivery anything versus delivery meals versus delivery groceries. I think there's probably two things here. It's like the nature of the category, probably, and then the ability to serve it and what the right business models are to serve it. And maybe let's start with the first, because that's actually easier to explain. Supermarkets have massive fixed costs at the moment for supply chains, for store, like massive power on acquiring groceries to sell. They have like a really, really streamlined business model, but ultimately groceries is actually pretty competitive and so is not very high margin. So even if you can just like get the things to the stores, you don't have a lot of extra money to play with. And so then adding on salaried riders, smaller stores, so you end up with like less efficiencies of scale, more difficult deliveries, eats away at that grocery margin. So just the grocery business in and of itself is low margin. Then the thing that means Uber can be profitable, or these kind of delivery services wherever they are in the world, is increasing utilization of the people who are doing the delivery. And that's the key thing for Uber, is increasing the number of active passenger hours that a driver has, or the number of active delivery hours for food, and being able to reuse people who are delivering food or passengers or other things in a whole bunch of different ways makes it way more valuable for the person doing the delivery and ultimately for like Uber to continue as a company. And so trying to like mash those two things together, and then also having full-time employees rather than contractors with like much more variable pay rates. And particularly in Australia, where there's reasonably good kind of employee welfare and pay rates, maybe versus a lot of other countries, like you just completely run out of any margin to play with. And in that particular business model, there's not really a way back. And then groceries in particular just have challenging supply chains, because in a lot of cases, to the point we made earlier, the demand could be spread across the whole day when you'd want to get them delivered. There's a lot of like cold supply chain requirements that become very expensive to install and then deliver and everything else, versus like Uber Eats, which is probably more predictable demand, I imagine. You can utilize those, though. Like an individual restaurant is never going to was rarely going to employ a single person to deliver, although maybe that's coming back now. Maybe that's cool again, given Uber Eats has pumped their margins up so much.
The only thing I'd add to that is that the restaurants are taking a lot of the complexity out of it, like managing inventory, because they know approximately what their demand is going to be on a micro level, managing things like expiry, all of that sort of stuff adds up. And if, as the delivery provider, you don't really need to worry about that, then that becomes significantly easier. So it's quite an interesting one. I think the main lessons that we can probably take out of it are it's highly density dependent. You probably need low labor costs, so Australia is probably not your place.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those people that's just like, oh, Australia is too expensive to do business. I'm like, this is kind of just a shitty business, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then I think it's the incremental purchase behavior. That's a huge assumption, but you're still competing with Woolworths and Coles, and a lot of people will just go and do a huge shop, and they've got alternatives, as you said, which is like a Woolworths Metro, which is close by that you can just walk across the street to. So you've got a lot of competition. And then in addition to that, Woolworths, Coles, they started having their own online delivery based things that were adjacent to Milkrun. Like they didn't have a 2-hour delivery promise, or a 10-minute delivery promise rather, but that you could sort of schedule a window for later in the day. And for a lot of people, that was enough. And then it means that you're in a very skinny part of the market that obviously wasn't really viable.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be really interesting to see like the marginal curve of like what percentage of people, what percentage of the time are willing to pay how much for like immediate delivery. And I imagine like, you know, most people have lives that are reasonably predictable. Like, you kind of know, oh, I'm going to be home probably 2 or 3 or 4 nights this week. And so I'll need something for dinner those nights. And maybe I want a meal prep, and maybe I wanted this, and maybe I wanted that. And so people's capacity to plan out when they're going to need deliveries and, make their life around that. How much more valuable is it to be able to like, oh, okay, I'm going to do my meal planning and I'm going to get it delivered right now and then I'm going to do it all. Is that actually that much more valuable than planning things out a little bit more?
One, no, it's not. And two, it's really expensive to fulfill that need to the extent that it's there. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can give it a huge L, but we should probably go through the outhouse to penthouse ratio.
Well, actually, I mean, before that, maybe it's probably worth reflecting on what came of Milkrun, right? Like it got bought out by Woolworths. They paid, I thought it was like $11 million, but maybe it was less than that, to Milkrun for their customer database, and the list of all the people and then the brand that they had. And it certainly didn't pay back what was invested in it, but it wasn't nothing. And now Milkrun exists as a separate app. My understanding is it's all technically, like the technology is all on Woolworths stack, but it's basically 1 hour delivery from Woolworths that is fulfilled, I think, by Uber.
They use, I guess, a more flexible delivery arrangement through using Uber drivers. So using existing capacity that's more matched to demand. They also have the stores that are stores in their own right. So they're not required to be profitable specifically on the on that arm. Like they've got a lot of redundancy behind it. It's just a small part of the business, and they're really just using it as an experimentation arm around that last mile and trying to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Is it profitable right now? I'd suggest probably not. It's hard to say. I had a quick look at their P&L and income statement, but like it's obviously not a line item that's independent on there that you can attribute specifically to Milkrun.
Yeah.
But given that Woolworths shut down the dark stores and folded it into existing fulfillment and third-party delivery, and I think it's more just an experimentation arm for them and a customer acquisition arm as well. So I'd suspect that it just results in a very small margin dilution for Woolworths with some potential marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know that it would be margin dilutive, right? Like they charge more for the groceries that you purchase on there. The delivery wouldn't cost them that much. They're probably using existing store staffing capacity to fulfill the orders. I reckon it's probably more like top-up shop, or things that people might just go to the corner store or whatever. And like Woolworths has reasonably strong loyalty. You get everyday rewards points for shopping in Milkrun, for shopping on their delivery, for shopping in store, for all the other stuff. I think if you looked at it at a like customer level, it would be driving profitability per customer that uses it,
as opposed to a transaction level. So it's like somewhat of a moat competitively against Coles and IGA, in that if people are used to using Woolworths through the app as well, then maybe they'll tend to use Woolworths as their weekly shop as well.
Yeah, definitely. And like I certainly know sometimes when we go away on holidays, the Woolworths is just a bit far to drive, and so sometimes it's nice to be on the beach and be like, oh, I feel like lunch. We'll get some sandwich, like some bread and some sandwich stuff and some chocolates or whatever delivered.
Yeah.
And great, they'll be here in an hour.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which is, I'd probably go to the local cafe or something instead. And so there's some cannibalization there of other ways people might spend.
No, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I reckon they've probably done it's probably a worthwhile investment for them picking up that customer list and that brand.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, I don't think we can sit here and say that the people who run Woolworths are silly people. They tend to do okay. So let's assume that there was some rationale behind it. I mean, that being said, it's not like the initial investors in Milkrun were silly people. Like I know the big fella at your work was one of the investors, along with people like Airtree and all those sorts of things, and Sequoia, I think.
Yeah, a lot of smart people. I mean, I guess for a lot of investors, maybe it was worth, potentially high risk, high reward if it was going to replace the supermarkets. So worth being in if it's not going to send your portfolio into the ground.
Maybe they were just hoping they'd get acquired by Ghetto before Ghetto went out of business.
Or acquired by Woolworths before they were in dire straits.
Yeah, it was unfortunately too late. So
Yeah.
I think with that, let's get on to the outhouse to penthouse ratio. Where should we start?
Well, I think that as we always do, let's start working out if this is actually a real problem that Milkrun was solving.
Well, I'm going to give that a 0. I don't. I think it was a problem, but clearly they never worked out the economics of it such that it was an economical problem to solve. So it's like a
Yeah.
problem, but not a big enough one, given all
And
of
I
the
think in
old.
particular, the 10-minute delivery problem is like not big enough, but also now there's like 1 hour delivery, and it like forced everyone else in the industry to lift their game in terms of delivery timing and availability, and I guess almost market segmentation in terms of like, sure, I'll pay a little bit more to get it delivered in an hour versus scheduling it for like tomorrow morning. So I think they were like onto something, but it wasn't quite the right problem to solve, where it could have been
Yeah,
more segmented or stratified.
I'd call it a 0 because like it's not a problem, but in insofar the way that they packaged it,
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't solving a big enough one.
Yeah, yeah. And like, I guess notwithstanding that we're like, it's for us, it's very easy to go down to the supermarket and get what we need to. And there's a lot of people who aren't that lucky, who this would have been life changing for, to have really great delivery that you didn't have to wait 24 hours for. But also it's like that 10-minute verse, like how close do you have to be to like right now? And then what does that imply for your cost structure and everything else?
I was going to say, for those people for whom it would have been a game changer, it would have cost way too much to serve them. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah. But I think it's a good point. I think we know this wasn't the problem to solve, but it's not pointing in the right direction. Cool. All right, so 0, I reckon. Like, did it work and did it scale?
On their ability to do it, yes. Like, as in, it was technologically, physically possible.
Yeah.
It wasn't like vapor work. Vaporware. It did what it said it was going to do. But did the economics of it scale? No.
Well, I think that's the next question about, is it defying gravity? I think like technically, and they proved that they could scale. They opened a bunch of dark stores. They recruited new riders. Like, it didn't fall over under the load. It was still a great experience every time.
So +1 on that.
Yeah, I think so. They didn't collapse under the weight of its own demand or something, at least from a production app and delivery experience. So yeah, I think they get a +1. And I mean, to your point earlier, it was actually a really nice user experience.
Yeah, that's true.
Cool. All right, so they're at +1. Is it defying gravity? So can it be delivered profitably before the money runs out? I think we have a pretty clear proof point on that one.
I think we have multiple proof points across multiple geographies.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
So back to 0 on
back to
the
0.
running total.
Is there reality distortion going on? So was the leadership rejecting evidence, to the contrary about success? Were they drinking their own Kool-Aid?
I think a little bit, because they were projecting $7 billion revenue by 2026. So that's obviously not come true. And they were saying what a great job they were doing because they got the average order value up to $50 at a peak, so that they were only losing $10 per delivery. But that's still losing $10 a lot of times. And I don't know what assumptions would have had to hold for that to eventually go into a positive number. So I'm going to say yes, there was a little bit of reality distortion. But to their credit, it was not like they were the only people doing it, right? And that's why we're looking at this industry as a whole. Like, there was a lot of confirmation bias across multiple countries.
Yeah. And I think there was, as we said before, there was a lot of like very smart investors who clearly saw some possibility in it. And I think they were pretty realistic when it all kind of came to an end as well. So
they didn't, I think they paid all their creditors and everything. So they at least wrap things up.
Yeah. I guess that's the point of debt versus equity, right? Like, they didn't go screaming into the ground and leave a bunch of people out to dry who didn't understand the risk that they were getting involved in. So I don't know if it's like entirely unfair. I don't think they were like full on WeWork.
No, I don't think that they were WeWork, but like WeWork might be one of those special exceptions that gets a -2, right? Or
Hey, look, WeWork's still in business. They're just a real estate company, not a tech company.
Sure, but under its initial, or maybe Elizabeth Holmes is a bit of a better example.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like it's probably fair to say a 0 for this
Okay.
one. It wasn't like a total
Yeah.
clusterfuck.
They're running it. They're running at a net 0 then so far through.
I think,
4
yeah.
metrics?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then the last one is an elephant or a cockroach, and does it need a huge amount of momentum and cash to work, or can it operate lean?
It cannot operate lean.
No. I mean, not with the model they had.
No, there's no way, right? The only way it could operate lean is if it's a corner store with an owner who owns a push bike and doesn't have to pay themselves anything and just takes calls
or a really efficient grocery store and then a really efficient delivery platform working together. That's, I guess, would be the lean operation, right?
It's hard to see.
Yeah.
I think you need an enormous amount of scale and clearly an enormous amount of funding, 85 million in the case of Milkrun, which never left the ground, and 5.5 billion in the case of Getter. So I think that's thoroughly an elephant.
Yeah. So I think that's a -1, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it's in the outhouse, but we're not talking like, it's not the grossest outhouse you've ever seen. We've seen worse on this show.
Yeah, there's much worse. And I mean, if you think about it, it was a broad ecosystem of experiments that happened here across different geographies and funders and models and like market structures. This was all mostly just an investment in testing different ideas that kind of have been adopted by other parts of the industry, maybe not quite to the same extent, but I think probably did push grocery forward in some ways.
No, I think that's fair. But, per our metrics and our provocative title, it does go into the outhouse.
Yep.
Because it's important in this content era to strip all nuance out of everything and give hot takes.
Absolutely.
Tier lists, blind ranking.
The clip economy.
Yeah, all of that good stuff. So this one can be clipped. Milkrun goes into the outhouse. We need some sort of sound.
It's the milk's off.
The milk's off. There we go.
No, I bet that's definitely been a headline. Milkrun goes off. Surely.
It must have been. If not, maybe that'll be our headline.
Wordsmith over here. It's Opus 4.8's been helping me.
Nice. All right. Thanks, Will.
All right.
Great to chat to you. Talk to you on the next one.
Chat soon. See you, buddy.